Imagine for a moment that you are a road-weary traveler. You're tired, you're hungry, and wondering if there will ever be a safe place to rest. You've been told there's an outpost ahead that provides safety, information for the road ahead, and people who understand what the journey is like. You keep scanning the horizon, hoping against hope that it will be there. Then, as you come over a rise in the terrain, you suddenly catch a glimpse of it. There it stands, beckoning you to come and find the rest you need. You're moments away from the outpost. Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Outpost podcast. I am Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host, and it is good to share some time with you. Thanks so much for joining me at this digital oasis of sorts, and that's kind of what the Outpost is. Just to give you an introduction, a little bit of this. The Outpost is kind of a digital, as I said, oasis. And in the desert lands, oasis was a place of nourishment and of refreshment and connection and information and all of those things. And outposts very much fit into that scenario, as you heard even in the introduction, if you indeed listen to it. So it's a digital place where we're trying to build bridges back to faith for people that have had it, or maybe even to strengthen the bridges of faith that people once had. Generally, the audience and the people that I want to talk to are people that have fled the church. And obviously, I'm not I'm not excluding people that are happy with church. That's great. But there are plenty of people out there that are listening, I would say, that have not had a pleasant experience with church. And it may even go into and be described as church abuse even. And those are the more, I wouldn't say dramatic examples. I think, generally speaking, the worst thing about churches are humans that they populate it, and a lot of the humans that populate it are bent on and very much focused on controlling the outcome of the people that are following them rather than accentuating and potentiating their freedom. So we're trying to build some bridges here, bridges of faith, and even to strengthen those. And really the values of the Outpost include authenticity. They include living in grace and truth, living in the tension between those, not the balance, but the tension between those two, which means ultimately what we're talking about here is that there are two things of equal value. They are of equal value, and they tug us both ways, in a sense, whether it's in our relationships with people or in our relationship even with ourselves, for that matter, and then ultimately how do we conduct, or how do we see our relationship with our Abba Father, the one that loves us so much that he was dying to help it, make it possible for us to be his friend, to be in relationship with him. And I know that sounds absolutely fantastic, not fantastic in the good sense, but just a fantasy for a lot of people to even think about something like that, because they're images of God that have been passed on to them through a variety of means, whether that's from the pulpit or whether that's from relationships or whatever that is. They can't believe that that's true. Then unfortunately they subscribe to the kind of notion that I have to get myself cleaned up before I come into the presence of God. And God basically ends up, and Jesus basically says, listen, I'll get unclean, I'll get dirty so that you can come to me as you are, not as you should be. And so what we want to do, and ultimately the vision of Stained Glass International and also just the Outpost itself, is to create a space where the doubters and the wounded and the confused and beat up and beat down and the bruised who feel like their lives are a disappointment to God can feel accepted enough to be known and to know others. So we want to be the kind of place, the context, not to bludgeon people with Jesus, but to introduce him to it, to bump into him in their relationships with others that are part of the Outpost. And like I said at the very beginning, when I use the word oasis, it's the place where we not only get refreshment and encouragement and support, but it's also a place where we get more information. We get equipped for the journey that's ahead. And that's really what the role is that I think I end up playing. And hopefully other people that I bring along for the ride that might give us an opportunity to listen to other people's thoughts about the journey and what it's like and what spiritual formation really is all about. The fancy word is just, how do I live my relationship with God? And so pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Hopefully I can be talking about some of the issues that are of interest to you, about where you live, what you think, how you feel about living life with yourself, with others, and maybe even with Jesus. So I have been doing a series, and it's been a little disjointed because of how far apart the episodes are. It's kind of hard to track, I realize, because of that. But it really is a function of a lot of things, not the least of which is a very disjointed schedule of mine to be able to sit down and finally put this down, have this be recorded. So the question I want to ask, and this goes to, we were looking at 4 different communities. We were talking about a principle-based community. We were talking about an insight-based community. And then we are also looking at a support-based community. And those 3 all have things that of value for us to consider. But then there are things that are short-lived. They are short, even sighted. They don't entirely get it the whole way. If we're so driven by our principle, then we end up missing people. Or we're so driven by helping people have the right insight, presuming that insight will actually make a difference. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't. But getting so bent on that we end up missing people again. And that seems to be a lot of these things, because the community, by the very nature of it, when we talk about community, we're talking about people and relationships with people. But you can usually tell where somebody is coming from by the questions they ask about the problems people wrestle with, and what they ask and their questions about that tell you a lot about what they're after and what they believe is the way to change to occur. And so one of the things that I ended on the last episode, which is coming out soon, I know that this one is going to be broadcast. I don't know what you call it. Posted. That's it. It's going to be posted on a week from today. So there's lag time coming up. But if you want a sneak peek, you can see it on the website at sgi-net.org. And you can see a sneak peek of upcoming episodes there. You just need to sign up for our online community to be able to be informed when a new one has dropped. So the website is sgi-net.org, and just click on media, and you'll be able to get the sneak peek if you are part of our community. So what does it take for us to actually be engaged in and be a part of a redemptive community? And ultimately, a redemptive community is made up of people that are in redemptive relationships. Now, this doesn't mean it is continuous. It doesn't mean that they get it right every time. It doesn't mean they don't lapse into old behavior when it comes to insight or principle or support. But it is the overall character or even culture of the outpost that is redemptive. So one of the big items that I would just underline is in the characteristics or the culture is a culture that is committed to cultivation, not to production. Because ultimately, if I cultivate the right things, then presumably the production will take care of itself. If I'm only focused on production, then I will seek to find a shortcut, because essentially the ends justifies the means. In this case, and in a redemptive community, what we have is a commitment to cultivation and cultivating within us the kinds of things that produce a byproduct that would be considered redemptive community. So the first thing, the first value, if you will, is to cultivation, not only within, but amongst people as well. The second thing is living in the tension between grace and truth. And if we are going to tolerate the tension between grace and truth, then we are going to have to be willing to be uncertain, maybe even unclear about what the quote unquote right thing is to do. And that's what's key to understand here, is that we search for a right way to do it. And what we need to be searching is for a, not a right way, but a way to connect with the person in front of me. Their needs need to drive me along, not doing it right. Because our assumption is if I do it right, everything will turn out okay. And we don't know that, for one. Maybe it will. But on the other hand, how much does it empower and how much does it encourage freedom in the other person? Because if it steals freedom, then it really isn't grace. It really isn't that at all. And truth, Jesus made very clear, and he made the connection that truth and freedom are intimately connected. And so living in the tension between grace and truth leaves us in this no man's land, if you will, that is lacking in clarity, but calls us to trust. And time again, so many issues, all the trails lead back to trust. Because trust and control cannot coexist. It is in our nature to try to control for outcomes because we can't be guaranteed that they will show up, and we don't trust anybody, or we don't trust God, or we don't trust the circumstances, or whatever that might be. Okay, so living in the tension between grace and truth is the second value. The third one is gaining a sensitivity to the ravages of shame in our lives. And that is a flip side of what I just talked about in terms of grace and truth. Because we have been marinating in shame all of our lives. As a matter of fact, I would go so far to say that we have been marinating in shame for multiple generations leading up to us. One of the things I often do, or I did do, because I don't teach this class any longer, but I used to do a class called Family Psych, and now it's morphed into what we call Family Dynamics. And one of the assignments I would often give my students is something we call a genogram, and that's basically charting out the relationships, starting with the great-grandparents, down to grandparents, down to parents, and then down to the particular individual that we're talking about. And what is really quite remarkable is to see multi-generational patterns of shame show up time and time again. And even when somebody accepts Christ into their lives, as their Lord and Savior, they do that, the shame still persists because we don't know the target or the monster that we're fighting. And inadvertently, we intermix our faith with shame, and our faith diminishes without us even knowing it. Now, at the front end, it doesn't always start out that way, but over time it diminishes because the dirty little secret about shame is it gets things done. But they don't stay done is the problem. And so one of the values in a redemptive community is that we are willing to confront shame, first in myself, and then in encouraging others to notice it and begin to move away from it as a strategy for change. Because ultimately, grace and freedom are connected, and grace empowers us to create a space so that we can change. Shame does not. It sets one path before us, and we comply with it or we don't. And if we don't, we're failures. And if we do, we're less of a failure, for lack of a better way to put it. And then the last thing, last value is we learn how to develop a vision for each other of what we could be, and maybe even develop a vision for how we are seen by God himself. Because the reality is we see ourselves as we see God seeing us as we see us. Did you follow that? If you did, you get a gold star. Because we make God's eyes ours, not resting and even trusting in our Father's eyes for us. Because time and again you will hear me say, and this is a repeat of a mentor of mine who said that the heart of our God, the heart of Father God, is to love us as we are, not as we should be, because we are never going to be who we should be. And let me take it apart before you react, because who we should be is usually built on the culture around us. If we see ourselves as we are, which means we are being redeemed, we are being changed, which Paul talks about, we are being transformed, then we have to live with an unfinished picture. And that's unpleasant to us, even as humans. That's unpleasant because we hate unfinished pictures. We would rather have it be finished and awful than have it be unfinished with the hope of something better. It's a little bit like the old saying, I'd much rather have a known demon than an unknown angel. And that same thing is true here. So we have to find some way in terms of developing vision to develop the kind of integrity that allows us to be seen, just like pure glass. And it allows us to be seen. Now, that doesn't mean by everybody. Don't hear me wrong. I am not saying that. What I believe is that we have to develop a blind system, a blinding system, a blind system. I mean, I have one on the window behind me, and I pull the blinds because I don't want everybody watching what I'm doing in my office. I do all sorts of gesticulating things as I talk or as I work through various things or whatever it might be. It's none of their business. I don't know them. They have not shown themselves to be trustworthy. That's what a blind is for. But when I want to see, and maybe even when I want to be seen, I open the blinds. And maybe I only open them a part of the way because not everybody gets to see all of it. They just don't. The thing that we have traded pure glass, clear glass for is stained glass. And that's where the organization has gotten its name, Stained Glass International, is we live behind a stained glass. And the stained glass puts forward a picture of who we want ourselves to be or who we want other people to think we are, and behind it we are safely ensconced and safely hidden and safely not known. We are safely obscure from people, and we wonder why we end up struggling with loneliness and isolation and anything related to that, because we choose safety over connection. And so the last thing I'll mention about this vision thing is that the community itself is one of becoming, I wouldn't say being, because it's always becoming, but it's becoming a Me Too community. In other words, my ability and how I listen is not to critique, is not to correct. It is to find connections with the other person. And that's what Me Too is about. It's not Me Too, let's go off and do something stupid. It's Me Too, I've done something stupid. And maybe that's what you're confessing to me. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt and went home. Let's talk. Let's journey through this. Let's find a better way. Together, not alone, but together. The alternative is a community of people that is known by you should. They're busy telling people how they should be and how they should behave and what they should think and how they should feel and all the other things that go along with that. And that community of people are people that are safely behind their walls and opening in the wall just to yell out at somebody else how they should be. So this gives you a little bit of a picture of what I'm talking about and where we're starting to get this going. Now, the question is what are the main themes or the main characteristics of the kind of community that I'm talking about here? And what I want to do over the succeeding weeks is to walk you through 6 different dimensions. Now, let me give you a little bit of a background on this. Because many years ago, I had been in private practice probably for about 10 years, and I began doing consulting work and working with a men's ministry here in Colorado. I was in Illinois, and I was conscripted to do a fair amount of flying, talking to pastors about how our ministry, the men's ministry, could develop resources for them and their ministries in their church. And as I flew one time, on a pretty long flight, I posed a question to myself, and that question was, if you were to boil down all that you talked about with people, if you were to boil it all down into major themes, what would those be? And the question is what am I always talking about? I mean, that would be the simplified question of it. What are the things that I'm always pointing out to people? And it feels like to someone like me who has multiple appointments, one right after another, I feel a little bit like a broken record. I just keep on repeat over and over and over again. But I began to realize as the longer I thought about this and the more that I kind of worked on it, if you will, what I began to realize is that these themes are themes that are key to having healthy redemptive relationships. Redemptive in the sense that we participate with God in each other's lives, okay? And so what I finally boiled it all down to was 6 different dimensions, and that's what I want to walk through over the next few weeks. The first one is truth, and what do we do with truth? And not only just truth, but reality. How do I deal with reality? And I can tell you from sitting talking to people all the time that a lot of times all of us, myself included, want to have a war with reality. It's not how it It's not how it should be. Because we have this really annoying characteristic of ours as humans where we can create images of the future or create images of the ideal, which is what should be. And so reality doesn't often, I might say rarely, does it conform to our vision of how we think it should be. So there's two different things here that I'm trying to address in this particular theme, and that is truth. And what is truth? Like Pilate asked Jesus when he was questioning Jesus during his trial before his crucifixion, and Pilate got exasperated and he finally said, "What is truth?" Well, that is the question for the ages and is a question for this particular theme that I'm talking about. The next one is control. And you hear me talk about it behind this mic all the time, control. And the statement that I made earlier was control and trust cannot coexist. And you can check it in any context, and it always turns out that way. And so control is really in our emotional, in our spiritual, and you might even say in our physical DNA. Because most of our systems in our bodies are control systems. They manage things. They keep things in balance. They pump more things in, more hormones in, more neurotransmitters in when there's a deficit. It's a control system. So it's built into us, but then we bring it into the kind of relationships so that we feel safer, and that's control. Third one is boundaries. Where do I end and somebody else starts? Trying to understand my attempt, and again, it connects back to control. My attempt to control other people by being overly compliant or being belligerent or cantankerous or whatever it might be. So boundaries, and then the fourth one is forgiveness and reconciliation, and those two concepts, those two actions we are called to, even as Christians, is to forgive and to be agents of reconciliation. But there's another thing lurking in there and written, and a part of that we spend very, very little time talking about. But that's the fourth dimension, is forgiveness and reconciliation. The fifth one is conflict. I think generally most people you talk to, they would say they are conflict averse. They avoid conflict at all costs. And unfortunately, there's a cost to be paid with avoiding conflict. And the last but not least is intimacy, and what intimacy actually looks like. And so what I want to focus on tonight is truth, and spend a little time talking about this for you. And I've spent a lot of time getting it set up here. I know that I've taken probably way too much time in that regard. But let me take a few minutes at least to introduce this idea of truth. Because truth, as Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? Ironically, he was talking to the embodiment of truth. But in our world, in our human world, there is what I would suggest for consideration. It is not absolute. It is not the gospel by any means, but it is a way to understand our world. And that is that there is such a thing as big T truth and little t truth. Now, big T truth, the way to separate these things out and understand the differences between these two things is big T truth is universal. It is applicable to everybody, like gravity. All right? Gravity is a reality, fits into that category as well. But it is a big T truth. It is universal. It is applicable to everybody. I have not met one person that has defied gravity, including myself. I gave it a try and I lost. So big T truth also includes not only the reality like that's applicable to everybody, but it's also what's revealed in God's Word. in terms of the doctrines of our faith and the things that we are told about living life well with one another and living life well with God, and all of that we would refer to as kind of the body of knowledge that we hold true about God and about us is big T truth. Oftentimes, we will spout big T truth onto a situation that is all about little t truth. Now, little t truth is different. Little t truth, lowercase if you will, but that's kind of wordy. Little t truth is a truth that is unique to me. Okay? So when I'm talking to somebody and I'm describing how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking, and they say, "Are you sure?" And a lot of times I will say, you will say, "Yeah, it's the truth. That's what's there." But that's little t truth. I'm not describing a truth that is universal to everyone. I'm describing a truth that is unique to me. And I would suggest to you, little t truth is the reality of who we are. It includes confusion and fear and doubt and disorientation and disillusionment and despair and joy and excitement and happiness. All of those things are contained in little t truth. And ultimately, little t is the stuff that makes us us. It's you might say our personality is included in there. That's little t stuff, because we do change over time. So that truth, quote unquote, changes. But reality doesn't change, right? Truth doesn't change. Big T truth doesn't change. But the problem is in relationships that are attempting to be built on truth, that we make the mistake of trying to apply one kind of truth onto another kind of truth and expect it to fix it or to help it. I mean, fixing it is a problem unto itself, which don't get me started on that. But big T truth gives us a plumb line for living life. It is universal. It gives us the principles for living and living in relationship with God and others and ourselves. That's what big T truth is, applicable to anybody that's out there. On the other hand, my reality, my truth, I can't apply to somebody else. The funny thing about it is we're really good at thinking that our experience is normative and therefore can be applied to anybody else. And that begins to be a real problem. So with big T truth and little t truth kind of floating out there now, we can live in the truth, God's truth, for example. Psalm 15 talks about that, is living in it. And David talks about in that short psalm about how we need to speak the truth in our inmost being. And the truth he's talking about is God's truth, about his character, his love for us, all of those things. And really, ultimately, living in the truth means accepting who I am as I am. It is that. Now, that doesn't mean it's a reality that can't change, but it's reality as it is, not as I would make it, is really what it's all about. And that's what living in the truth means. And a really good example, if you're familiar at all, with the Serenity Prayer. And if you're familiar with it, most of the time, the only thing we say, and it was written by a theologian by the name of Reinhold Niebuhr, and it goes, the first four lines are the ones that we tend to emphasize the most, and it actually is quite long. And so let me say the first four that everybody probably could repeat with me. Some people could, certainly. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And we think that that's the end of the prayer, but it isn't. Reinhold Niebuhr continues, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, which is a remarkable statement. Hardships as a pathway to peace. Taking as he did, and that's capitalized he, implying Jesus, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and ever in the next. It's a remarkable prayer when it comes right down to it. And the thing that I would have you pay attention to is that God accepted the reality of what we live in more than we do. That's exactly why he sent Jesus, to start the process of redeeming creation and redeeming us and drawing us back into relationship with him. He paid all the price up front, and that's really what it's all about. And so when we talk about big T and little t truth, if somebody is talking to you, let me just give you a quick word of advice. I don't hand this out a lot, but if somebody's talking to you about the little t realities or the little t truth inside of them, now is not the time to uncork some big T truth to fix it. Now is the time to listen intently and try to understand. Just because you attempt to understand does not mean that you are condoning what they're talking about. It just means that you want to connect. That's it. Now, we tend to think, or we tend to assume that if I don't correct somebody, then I am condoning their behavior, and that could not be farther from the truth. My connection and my presence with that person is the greatest the greatest intervention to communicate to another person that they are worthy of our connection, and therefore change can occur, because connection engenders hope, because we're not so far gone that a person won't still try to connect to us. So let me just close with one rather long quote, again from my mentor, and it's from his book, The Ragamuffin Gospel. It's a very good book. If you've never read it, I'd encourage you to do so. But he ends, and this is a great way to end for me as well, is he says this: once we accept the gospel of grace and seek to shed defense mechanisms and disguises, which is like the stained glass, honesty becomes more difficult and more important. Now, honesty involves the willingness to face the truth of who we are, regardless of how threatening or unpleasant our perceptions may be. It means hanging in there with ourselves and with God, learning our mind tricks by experiencing how they defeat us, recognizing our avoidances, acknowledging our lapses, and learning completely that we cannot handle it ourselves. This steady self-confrontation requires strength and courage. We cannot use failure as an excuse for not trying. God offers us the kind of grace that makes it possible for us to change. If we resort and go back to our usual methods of trying to change, most of the time fueled by shame, how bad, awful we are, and we can't do anything right, and we really don't deserve anyone's love at all, then we will continue on as we've always gone. But grace creates a space for us to change, and grace starts with probably somebody outside of me offering it to me and me believing them enough to begin to embrace it for myself. And that's a big part of what we are talking about here in this kind of community, this kind of the outpost that is the oasis for our refreshment, support, and encouragement and information, all of those things that are very much a part of that. So that's it for tonight. I think I've rambled on long enough. SGI-net.org is the home base for all things having to do with the outpost, having to do with our media, and all things related to our retreats, which we are entering into. If you have any questions at all, you're welcome to use the contact form at the bottom of the page at sgi-net.org, or you can DM me on Instagram, any of that. Two subscriptions I would encourage you to consider. One is to subscribe to the community on sgi-net.org. And that keeps you informed of, like, the sneak peek, for example, of this podcast, or of the video podcast at least. And it helps you to stay informed of what's going on in the community and the developments that are going on there. That is one subscription I would encourage you to consider. The second one is really for the podcast. We need the visibility of subscriptions that and reviews. If there are things that you hear, the things that are encouraging, write a review, and that certainly helps us to get the word out about what we're trying to accomplish here as well. So two subscriptions, one to the community and the other one to the podcast itself. You can find it on any platform that you consume or use or listen to podcasts. There is also on the website, if you tool around on it at all, you'll find digital devotionals for healthy relationships. You'll find a link for the new podcast that I started up called Unscripted as well. You can find that on iTunes or on Spotify or whatever you listen to there as well. And you're more than welcome to join us on our social media channels. It includes Instagram at SGI_international, SGI_international, at Facebook, Stained Glass International, and LinkedIn, Dr. Mitch. All of those platforms are where we can be found, and with the podcasts. If you desire or know someone who desires to support the work that we're doing through the retreats, we're going into our retreat season. We have 2 silent retreats coming up, one in the fall, one in the spring. I would certainly love to do more, but we need your help. We need your partnership to support us. All donations, all gifts are tax deductible. And so you can help us grow the scholarship fund to make it possible for people to go to a silent retreat who can't afford it. And you can do that whether by donation with the tab on the website. Obviously, it's labeled donate. Go figure, right? And even if you're real adventuresome, we have merchandise. If you want to try out a window sticker that would let people know about the Outpost podcast, or also the books. I have 2 different books that one released this past January. One's called Grieving the Loss of Someone You Love, and the other one is called The Seasons of Our Grief. And you can purchase those on the website as well. So if you'd rather send us a physical check, we are more than welcome to welcome it. Just simply make it out to SGI and send it to P.O. Box 322, East Lake, Colorado 80614. Wow, I had a lot more to say than I thought. Thanks so much for joining me. I will be here next time, and we will continue to talk about the dimensions of redemptive relationships and redemptive community. I hope you join me. And until then, love ya. Later. Bye.